I don't remember exactly when I first realized I liked him. It might have been one early autumn morning, when sunlight slipped through the classroom window and settled on his light brown hair, making it glow. Or maybe it was a late afternoon in the lecture hall, when he rested his chin on his hand and stared out the window with a distant look, as if the world wasn't interesting enough to keep him there. His name is Tatum. Mine is Stellan. We're in the same major, the same classes, sometimes sitting just one row apart. But between us there's always been this strange distance, not from dislike, but because I've never been brave enough to cross it. Tatum is the kind of person everyone notices, not in a loud, showy way, but through a presence that feels completely natural. He doesn't try, yet every gaze still drifts toward him. I'm the opposite. I'm the kind of person who could disappear from class for a day and no one would notice. Except, maybe him. I've imagined that before. How ridiculous. Everything began one evening in the university library. I was sitting alone in my usual hidden corner, where hardly anyone goes. In front of me lay an old novel I'd grabbed randomly from the shelf. Not because I wanted to read it, but simply as an excuse to stay there longer. The pen in my hand spun, then stopped. My heart beat faster than normal. I don't know what possessed me, but I tore a sheet from my notebook, laid it on the table, and started writing. To the person who will probably never read these words. I paused. It sounded pathetic, but I kept going. I wrote about Tatum, about the way he lightly taps his pen on the desk when he's thinking, about how he frowns when reading difficult material, about how he's always the last to leave the classroom, as if he's never in a hurry to be anywhere else. I wrote about the tiny details no one else notices, except me. I didn't dare write his name. I didn't write my own either. Just raw, honest lines that made me feel embarrassed the moment I finished. Maybe you'll never know there's someone who's always watching you like this. And maybe that's for the best. I folded the letter. Part of me wanted to rip it up immediately, but my hand refused. Instead, I opened the thick old novel in front of me, the pages already yellowed with time, and quietly slipped the letter between them. Then I closed the book, returned it to the shelf, as if burying a secret no one was allowed to find. I thought that would be the end of it. One impulsive act, one meaningless letter, and it would fade with time. But I was wrong. 3 days later, I went back to the library. No real reason. Just a vague pull I couldn't ignore. I walked straight to the old shelf and found the novel right where I'd left it. My heart raced as my fingers touched the spine. It was still there. I pulled it out, sat in my usual spot, opened it. My letter was untouched. But there was something else. A small, carefully folded piece of paper tucked right beside mine. I froze. For a few seconds I couldn't even touch it. Could have been nothing. Just some random scrap someone left behind. Probably had nothing to do with me. But deep down I knew it did. I opened it. To the person who wrote this letter. My hand trembled. I don't know who you are, but I read every line, and I think I understand how that feels. I swallowed. The air around me seemed to thicken. There's someone I've always watched too, but I've never had the courage to get closer. So maybe, in a way, we're the same. My heart pounded until it hurt. Thank you for writing the things I couldn't say. If you don't mind, I'd like to reply to your letter. I read the lines again and again, afraid they would vanish if I blinked. Someone had read my letter, and not only that, they had answered. Total stranger. Someone who understood me. I lifted my head and looked around the library. Everything was normal. A few students studying. One turning pages. Another typing on a laptop. No one was looking at me. No one knew what had just happened. But for me, the whole world had shifted. I looked back down at the paper in my hand. The handwriting was neat, slanted slightly to the right. Simple but easy to read. There was something warm in every stroke of ink. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they looked like. I didn't know where they were sitting in this room. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone anymore. I took out my pen. My heart was still racing, and I began to write. It took me nearly 10 minutes just to finish the first line. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because there was too much I wanted to say. To the stranger who read my letter. I stopped and looked at the words I'd just written. Stranger. It felt strange to call someone that after they had touched such a private part of me. But I had no other choice. I didn't know their name. I didn't know who they were. I only knew they understood. Thank you for not ignoring that letter. I wrote slowly, word by word. I thought it would stay in that book forever, like a secret that would never be opened. I took a deep breath. I never expected anyone to read it, and I definitely never expected a reply. The pen hovered. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. What if this person wasn't sincere? What if they were just toying with me? What if everything they wrote was fake? I gripped the pen tighter. No, there was something in their words that didn't feel false. Some things can't be pretended. Emotion is one of them. I don't know who you are, but I want to believe you're telling the truth. I wrote, and if that's the case, then maybe we really are alike. I smiled just a little. The person I like sits not far from me. Maybe right now they're somewhere on campus, completely unaware that someone is always watching them. I paused. I had written so much about Tatum, but strangely, this time I didn't feel as ashamed as before. Instead, I felt a little lighter. You said you have someone like that too. I wonder, have you ever thought about saying it out loud? I stared at the question. I already knew my own answer. No, I never would. As for me, I haven't. I think keeping things as they are is probably better. A pause. Then one final line. If you still want to keep writing, I'll come back here. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the exact same place in the book. My heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. In the days that followed, I lived in a strange new state. Every morning I still went to class like always, still sat in my usual seat, still looked at Tatum, the way I always had, but something had changed. I started noticing the people around me more. Which one of them could be the person who wrote to me? The guy in front who always wore headphones? The girl in the corner who wrote constantly in her notebook? Or the person sitting just one seat away? Tatum. I shook my head immediately. No, couldn't be. Tatum didn't seem like the type to do something like that. He was too calm, too distant. While the letter writer, they felt soft, real. I couldn't picture the two being the same. 3 days later, I returned to the library. This time I didn't need a reason. There was only one purpose. I went straight to the shelf. Heart pounding, hand shaking slightly. I pulled out the book, opened it, and there was a new letter. I almost laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because of the relief. They had come back. I opened it right away. To you, the person who is no longer a stranger. I froze. A warm feeling spread through my chest. No longer a stranger. Just one sentence, and everything changed. I've been waiting for this letter. I swallowed. I didn't think you would come back, but I hoped you would. I didn't realize I was smiling. You asked if I've ever thought about saying it out loud? A small gap. I have. My heart clenched. But then I realized there are things that, if said, could ruin everything. I gripped the letter tightly. That line was so much like me it was terrifying. The person I like isn't the easy-to-approach type. I frowned slightly. They're closer to me than you think, but farther away than anyone else. I read the sentence again. Once, twice. There was something in the wording that felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. I don't know who you are, but when I read what you wrote, I don't feel lonely anymore. My heart beat faster. So, if you're still there, I'll be here too. One last line. Together. Okay? I set the letter down on the table. stared at it. The world around me disappeared. There was only me, and those words. Together. A simple word. Yet it changed everything. I had never thought I could share this feeling with anyone. Never thought someone could understand me without knowing who I was. But now, I had that. One person. A complete stranger. Yet closer than anyone else. I took out my pen, no longer hesitating like before. To you, the person who is no longer a stranger. I wrote, and this time I knew. This was no longer just a letter. It was the beginning of something. I wrote faster. No more long pauses. No more heavy hesitation on every word. Only one clear feeling. I wanted to reply. Together. Sounds a little scary. I wrote, the corner of my mouth lifting. But it's also the first thing that makes me feel like I'm not alone anymore. I glanced up, scanning the library as if I might catch their eyes among all the strangers. Of course I didn't, but the thought that they might be somewhere very close, just a few steps away, made my heart race. I never imagined I would have a conversation like this. No names, no faces, no past. I continued. Only feelings and words. The pen moved lighter, more naturally across the paper. You said that speaking it out loud could ruin everything. I paused for a beat. Maybe you're right. I think so too. A slow breath. But sometimes I wonder, if we don't speak, what exactly are we protecting? I looked down at the question, not asking them, asking myself. I don't know who the person you like is, but the way you talk about them makes me think you watch them closely. A moment of silence. Me too. I bit my lower lip lightly and kept writing. They have a habit, when they lose focus, they tap the tip of their pen on the desk. 3 times, pause, then 3 times again. I could almost hear the sound in my head. No one notices, but I do. I smiled. You see, little things like that are what make it impossible to look away from someone. I stopped the pen. A thought came to me. Was I writing too much? Was I revealing too much? But then, maybe it was fine. They had done the same. You said the person you like is closer than I think. I wrote, slowing down. I'm starting to feel the same. A skipped heartbeat. Maybe we're sitting in the same room every day without realizing it. I looked up, my eyes unconsciously sweeping across every face in the library. A few people glanced up, then looked down again. No one lingered long enough for me to think it was them. I wonder if we've ever passed each other before. I wrote the last line, or even sat right next to each other without knowing. I folded the letter, placed it in the book, but this time, before closing it, I hesitated. Then I added a small detail, a very light round dot in the bottom right corner of the paper, almost invisible, except to someone who was looking. I don't know why I did it, just an instinct, a sign, something that could become ours. In the days that followed, everything began to change in ways I never expected. I still went to class, still sat in my usual seat, still looked at Tatum, but now, I was also watching everyone else, not casually, but searching. Who could be the person writing to me every night? The guy behind me who took meticulous notes? Or the one near the window who often stared outside with distant eyes? Or, I stopped. Tatum. He was sitting right in front of me today, just 1 row away. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd rushed to class. One hand propped under his chin, the other twirling his pen. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. My heart tightened. No, just a coincidence. Lots of people do that. I told myself that, but my eyes wouldn't leave him. Tatum frowned slightly as he read the material on his laptop, then let out a soft sigh. A tiny detail, almost invisible, but I had written about it before. I clenched my fist under the desk. Don't overthink. Don't invent connections that aren't there. But what if 3 days later, I returned to the library. The familiar racing heartbeat. The familiar anticipation. I opened the book. There was a new letter. And a small dot in the bottom right corner. Exactly like mine. I froze. My hand shook as I opened it. To you, the person who left the sign. I swallowed. They had noticed. I wasn't sure if it was on purpose. But I tried. And maybe I was right. I felt my heart stretch tight. There are little things only the two of us would understand. A pause. And I think we're starting to have those. I pressed my lips together. A feeling both strange and familiar filled my chest. You mentioned the habit of the person you like. I held my breath. What a coincidence. The person I like has a similar habit. My heart pounded so hard I had to press a hand to my chest. Couldn't be. Just a coincidence. It had to be. But what made me pause wasn't the habit. I read slower. It was the way you observe. I stopped. You see things others don't. A short line. And that makes me curious about you. I bit my lip, unsure whether to feel happy or scared. I started wondering whether we're actually closer than we think. I stared at the line. A shiver ran down my spine. Maybe we've already spoken without knowing it. A beat, or at least already seen each other. I set the letter down. My mind went blank. Thoughts tangled together, impossible to sort. I remembered class. Remembered every person. Remembered Tatum. No, couldn't be. But I wasn't sure anymore. I took out my pen. This time my hand wasn't steady. To you, the person who is very close. I wrote, and for the first time, I felt afraid. I stared at the words I had just written. The person who is very close. It sounded like an admission, like I was taking a step I wasn't sure I should take. I took a deep breath and continued. Maybe we've gone farther than I ever thought we would. The pen tip trembled. From a letter no one was supposed to read, to waiting for every reply like it's the most important part of my day. I smiled faintly, but my chest felt heavy. Do you feel the same? I wondered, then kept writing. I'm starting to feel scared. A truth I couldn't avoid anymore. Not of you, but of myself. I paused, looking down at my hand gripping the pen. If we really are close. If one day I find out who you are. A long pause. I'm not sure I can keep everything the way it is now. That was what scared me most. Not rejection, but losing this. The letters. The nameless connection. The feeling of being understood without having to explain. I know this sounds selfish. I wrote, but maybe I want to keep you like this a little longer. Person with no name, no face, yet the closest person to me. I don't want to break it too soon. The pen stopped. Then I added one small line. But if you want to meet, I won't say no. My heart pounded. It was the first time I had written that. An open door. An admission that I wanted it too. I just wasn't brave enough to say it outright. I folded the letter. But before putting it back, I stared at it longer than usual. Something inside me was changing. No longer just curiosity. No longer just empathy. But anticipation. Anticipation of knowing who they were. Anticipation of seeing them in real life. Anticipation of more than I dared admit. The following days passed in a strangely tense haze. I started noticing every tiny detail in class. No longer casual observation, but searching. Who could have written those words? Who understood me that deeply? Who sat near me every single day? I looked at each person, trying to picture them as the letter writer. But none of them fit. None gave me that feeling. Except, I clenched my fist. Tatum. He was still the same. Sitting in his usual place. Quiet. Occasionally talking to the person beside him, but never too close to anyone. There was an invisible wall around him, like he was holding himself back, like he was hiding something too. I had never thought that before, but now every time I looked at him, I started to wonder, what if it was him? What if all those letters were from him? One afternoon, while the lecturer was speaking, I unconsciously glanced down at my notebook, and then I froze. In the bottom right corner of the page was a small dot, very light, almost invisible. I didn't remember drawing it, but it was there, and at that exact moment, a memory flashed, the dot in the letter. I looked up immediately. My eyes went straight to Tatum. He was writing, also in the bottom right corner of his page. I held my breath. From this distance I couldn't see clearly, but something made my heart race faster. I didn't dare look too long, didn't dare be certain, because if it was true, everything would change. 3 days later I returned to the library. This time the feeling was different. Not just anticipation, but facing it. I opened the book. There was a new letter. I picked it up but didn't open it immediately. I looked at the bottom right corner. A dot. Clear. No longer a coincidence. I opened the letter. To you, the person who is afraid. I paused. They knew. I can feel it in the way you write. I gripped the letter tightly. You don't have to say it, but I understand. A pause. Because I feel the same. My heart slowed, but grew heavier. We're standing on a very fragile line. I read every word. If we step across it, everything changes. A short line, and maybe we'll lose each other. I closed my eyes for a second. That was exactly what I feared. But if we don't step across. I opened my eyes. We'll stay here forever. A question hung in the air. Are you okay with that? I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because there were too many. I've thought about it a lot. They wrote, and I think we should meet. My heart seemed to stop for a beat. Not right now, but soon. I swallowed. Same place where it all started. The library. Same book. I stared at the last line. Next week. Friday. 6 p.m. I set the letter down. The world around me vanished. There was only one thought. We were going to meet. After all the letters. After all the feelings. After all the unsaid things. We would finally face each other. And I didn't know whether I should look forward to it or fear it more. I took out my pen, heart racing, hand shaking slightly. To you, I wrote, and this time, there was no turning back. I stared at the paper for a long time. The appointment was right there, impossible to pretend away. Friday, 6 p.m., library, a specific time, a specific place, a step that couldn't be undone. I took a deep breath and wrote, to you, the person who chose to step across the line. The pen moved slower than usual, not because I didn't know what to say, but because every word now carried a decision. I've read your letter many times. The truth, I'm not sure how I should feel. I paused, gripping the pen lightly. Part of me wants to refuse. I smiled faintly, silently. Wants to pretend I never got the offer. A pause. But another part. Can't stop thinking about it. My heart beat faster. About meeting you. I swallowed. About finding out who you are. And I didn't write it, but I still thought. About whether you might be the person I'm thinking of. I'm scared. I wrote it plainly. No circling. No hiding. Scared that things won't be the same anymore. A long breath. But I'm also scared that if I don't meet you, I'll regret it. I looked at that sentence and knew it was the real reason. I will come. I wrote, no more hesitation. Friday, 6 p.m., library. One last line. But if I'm a little late, please don't leave right away. I stopped after writing it. I don't know why I added that. Maybe because I knew myself. I knew how terrifying that moment would be. I knew I might stand outside the door for a long time before I found the courage to walk in. I folded the letter, placed it in the book, and this time when I closed it, I felt like I had just set down a very important piece of myself. The following days dragged by slower than usual, not because time had changed, because I had. I started counting every day. Every morning when I woke up, the first thought was always, how many days left? I could no longer focus completely on the lectures, not because I didn't want to, but because my mind was always somewhere else. At the library, at the meeting, at the person I had never met, but thought about more than anyone. And then, I started noticing Tatum even more, not the secret glances like before, but deliberate observation, every gesture, every habit, every tiny detail. One morning I arrived at class earlier than usual. The room was almost empty, just a few people, and Tatum, he sat near the window. Light fell across his face, making every feature sharp and clear. I stood at the door for a few seconds, unsure whether to enter, but I did. Sat in my usual seat one row behind. Tatum didn't look at me. He was writing something. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. My eyes stopped on the bottom right corner of his page. A dot, very small, very familiar. My heart clenched. No more doubt. No more maybe. Just one clear truth. The person writing to me might be Tatum. I turned away immediately. My heart pounded so hard I was afraid he would hear it. No, not certain yet. Could still be a coincidence. He might just have the same habit. Could. I repeated the reasons in my head, but they no longer sounded convincing. Not after everything that had happened. That whole class I heard nothing. I only thought, if it was Tatum, then what? If the person who wrote all those letters was him? The person I had liked for so long? What would that mean? Would it mean he felt the same way? Would it mean he looked at me the same way? Or, no, I stopped myself. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't create hope. Just wait until Friday. Everything would become clear. But waiting had never been easy, especially when every passing day made me more certain of my suspicion. Tatum started appearing in my thoughts differently. No longer just the person I like, but the person who might be them. The person in the letters. The person who said, together. The person who had arranged to meet me. Friday came faster than I expected, and slower than I could stand. All day I could barely focus on anything. I kept checking the clock. 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Time crawled, as if deliberately stretching out the tension inside me. By 5:30, I stood in front of my dorm room door, hand gripping the strap of my bag. I could go right now, or I could not go. No one knew I had agreed. No one would blame me if I disappeared. Everything could go back to the way it was. The letters, the safe distance, no risk, no pain. But I closed my eyes. The words from the letters floated into my mind. Together, okay? I opened my eyes, and I walked. When I reached the library, the clock read 6:07. I stood outside the door. I didn't go in right away. I knew I would do this. I knew I would need more time. Inside, the lights were warm. Everything looked ordinary. Nothing special. Nothing to show that something important was waiting. I swallowed hard, heart racing. All I had to do was step inside. All I had to